Mama.
Hey everybody, Kieran aka The Learned here, back with another video for you, and it's been a little while since I've done a movie review, so it's really nice to sit down and do one of these again. And this is a movie that I backed on Kickstarter some time ago, and I'd actually forgotten that I'd backed it until I got the email saying you can now watch it. I only backed it to get the digital copy because I have to admit that when I first saw it there, it was kind of one of them projects that I thought I want to support this, but I've got a feeling that it's not going to do anything new. So I was a bit hesitant, so I backed it the minimum amount just to be able to watch the digital copy. And when I saw that I'd got it, I was actually quite excited to watch it because I hadn't watched anything like this for quite a while, especially nothing sort of Atari related. And yeah, so it's time for me to having watched it. Time for me to share my thoughts on the film. Sorry about that. You might have just heard my cat there whinging at me because he wanted to be fed. That's Big Basil, who you might have seen in the videos before, the big ginger one, who he likes getting into my videos, as anyone who watches my channel would know. But yeah, so. When I started watching it, my suspicions started to become true in the fact that I was watching it and thinking, this is nothing that I haven't seen before, this is nothing new, it's not doing anything different, they're speaking to the same old people. And so the first half an hour, I was kind of getting quite bored, and it wasn't really helped by the fact that I found the narrator really annoying. He's got this kind of really irritating voice and doesn't add any kind of excitement, even if it's something really cool that he's talking about. It's so monotonous and boring. And I thought he was a pretty bad choice for the narrator. He's obviously someone who knows what he's talking about, and that's probably why they got him. But it would have been nice if they'd had someone who had a bit more personality and wasn't so dull and monotonous. So after the first half an hour, I was even thinking about, God, there's another hour and a half left of this because it's a 2 hour film, and I was thinking, it's just going to be, what next, ET Dig and Worst Game, and I just wondered I just thought it was going to be a repeat of these same kind of documentaries about Atari I've seen before. But I'm pleased to admit that I'm actually wrong, because after that first half an hour, it actually got really, really, really good. And the main reason for that was actually because of the people they speak to, which you can probably see a few of them popping up on the screen behind me. I mean, they've got people like Joe DeCoeur, who you can see there, who was one of the guys who designed the Atari 2600. They've got Nolan Bushnell, of course. You can't have an Atari movie without Nolan. They speak to Chuck Peddle, who designed the 6502. They speak to, obviously, Howard Scott Warshaw, who's quite often in these. He did the Yard's Revenge and ET, and they speak to numerous other people like Ed Rothberg, who designed Battle Zones. There's loads and loads and loads of good people that they speak to in the film. But what is really interesting is, and the kind of coup de grace of the movie really, was they managed to get the former CEO of Atari, Ray Kassar, to speak. I've never ever heard Ray Kassar speak. And actually, right at the end of the movie, post credits, they've got this kind of extra little interview where Ray Kassar said that he only agreed to do it because he was fed up of watching all these movies, and he always gets a bum rap. He always gets slagged off, and he said that he was wanting to put his story across because he feels that he never gets to do that. Now, really, the key element of this and Ray Kassar's role in the film is probably not what he wanted it to be, and that's almost the most amusing thing about it, is that obviously, as I said, he agreed to do the movie to get his point across, and so he wouldn't be seen as the bad guy, and he wouldn't be seen as evil Ray Kassar, and he could show that he had a big role in Atari and their success and etc 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 and get the credit he deserves, you know, kind of thing. But what the film kind of turns into is this almost face off, and it's really well edited, between Ray Kassar and Nolan Bushnell. Now they'd never have them together in the film at any point, but what they do is they give, like, they've got Nolan's opinion on something, Ray Kassar's opinion on something, and they kind of start to merge them together, so they're going in and out of this same thing. And what you'll notice is that they totally contradict each other through the film. And we all know anyway that Nolan is a self-promoter. I think he would probably admit it. I think he pretty much said as much to me when I interviewed him a few years ago. And so, you know, he does tend to bend to the truth a little. He does tend to overplay his importance in certain things, I suppose. And actually, a lot of the people they spoke to in the movie kind of said that as well. You know, like Al Alcorn, who was obviously one of the first guys at Atari, and they speak to him. Sorry, my cat just will not stop pestering me. You probably heard him again whining. Yeah, so they with Nolan, you know, we know what he's like. So this is usual Nolan. He, you know, he's bigging himself up. And Al Alcorn, you know, kind of says Nolan was, you know, people loved Nolan. He was an entrepreneur. He had good ideas. He wasn't a great engineer. You know, he wasn't hands-on in terms of building the stuff. You got other people to do that for him. But Nolan was a great ideas man, and, you know, great publicist and all that kind of thing, and he was very likable, so he was good at getting people to work for him, he was good at manipulating people, etc etc. Now a lot of people say that about Nolan, and it's in this movie too. But then what is funny is that Ray Kassar is almost given this opportunity, but he comes across as amazingly unlikable, and you can't help but think that Nolan's right because of the way Ray Kassar comes across, in that you just think this guy is a bit of an arsehole, really. I think that's the only way you can put it. He doesn't take the blame for anything. He won't admit that he did anything wrong. It's almost like he did everything right. And when the other guys in the film have brought up instances with Ray Kassar that caused problems, like, for example, the well-known one where he belittled the programmers and told them they were just prima donnas and they weren't more important than the guys on the packaging lines and things like that, and boardroom meetings and stuff like that. And Ray Kassar denies nearly all of it, although he does actually admit that the stuff about the programs, he does admit that he said they're prima donnas. He does admit that a lot of them, he doesn't think that they were as talented as they thought they were and stuff like that. So he doesn't really do himself any favours there at all. And, you know, he's really, the way his mannerisms and stuff is just like, you know, so off, and he's so unlikable. It's almost like, although the film is a documentary, it's almost just like they found this perfect movie villain in Ray Kassar, because he, you know, you do, as get to the end of the movie, you learn to really dislike him, and you just think, what were Atari thinking putting him in charge? On the flip side, what I really liked as well with Nolan's story is, it actually gets quite emotional in the fact that Nolan really talks about his regrets about why did I sell Atari, and how much he regretted doing it, how he wishes he'd taken a holiday instead of selling to Warner. I mean, and on the Warner side, actually, I should have mentioned this, but there's loads of stuff on the Warner side, because they also speak to Manny Gerard, who obviously was the guy who acquired Atari for Warner, and was kind of that link between Warner and Atari. And he's great in the film because he gives loads of the business insight into the Warner end of things, and he talks quite highly of Nolan as well, and says that he wishes Nolan had stayed on, but they weren't left with any choice because of the way things were and stuff like that. And he's very honest. He comes across as a really honest, decent guy who just wanted the best. And also the way I saw his way, he also came across as a visionary as well. He really seemed to know where the industry was going to go, and that video games were going to become a really big thing. Sorry, that cat's driving me crazy now, won't leave me alone. So yeah, so you've got the real kind of hero and villain in Nolan and Ray Kassar, and then you've got this kind of great supporting cast with people like Joe DeCure, who's quite heavily in the movie, manager art. His stuff is brilliant. I loved hearing the Warner side of things, the business side of things, and they put loads of things in. You can see like their adverts, old Atari adverts, just little bits of gameplay. That's not what it focuses on. And all this part, but all that part of the character side of the documentary I absolutely loved, and I thought that was by far its strongest element. I also loved the way they really went into the stories of how they acquired Pac-Man, Space Invaders, how they tried to acquire Donkey Kong, but they didn't because Ray Kassar didn't want to spend a little bit more money to get it, and how they regretted not doing it and letting it go to Coleco. That was really, really interesting stuff. And they actually even speak to someone from Nintendo about that stuff as well, which I thought was really, really cool to get that in there as well. So that's the biggest positive. All that stuff is brilliant. It's worth watching the movie just for the stuff with Nolan and Ray on its own. But the only other downside is that it kind of just ends almost like quite suddenly. When it actually gets to the end of that 2 hours, it's like they get to where Atari were in serious trouble, and they were losing loads of money, and it was because of the market. And they actually give some interesting views on what caused the crash, and some really interesting points made that I hadn't heard before. Like, for example, saying that what caused it was because of everybody discounting their games. So the profits were getting lower and things like that. There's some really good points about that kind of stuff in there, and about how everybody was just jumping on the bandwagon to make games, and they don't think so much it was caused by stuff like Pac-Man and E.T., which I've always believed, because at the end of the day, they did those games both actually sold very well, and Warner's poor stock management obviously caused part of it as well. But there's some really interesting stuff in there. But it just kind of ends there, and then it's like, that's it. That's kind of the end of Atari. And I do think they should have gone on a little bit more and said, this is kind of what happened afterwards. I don't expect them to go into massive detail, because this was supposed to be about the beginning, of Atari. That was the whole point of the film, the beginning of the video game industry. And the next movie, I believe, that they're doing, because it's part of a series, is looking at the Commodore 64 and where computers came in and took over from consoles in America for a while before, and then I think they're going into the NES after that. So then the NES comes back and revitalises. It is a very American viewpoint, but the stuff with Atari doesn't matter so much, I don't think. It's kind of because Atari 27 was a very big thing in the UK and Europe as well. So, yeah, I do wish they'd gone into a little bit more and say, well, this is what happened at Atari afterwards, and then got some views on maybe from Nolan and stuff like that about should have Warner sold to the Trammels, that kind of side of things. That would have been really interesting to hear, and I think it would have made a nice end to the movie. A kind of what if the future of Atari had been different kind of slant to it, since they talk about a lot of that through their movie anyway, in terms of what they could have done differently. But yeah, overall, it was a really enjoyable watch. It's not the best documentary I've seen. I think that still goes to World War I, which I thought was just fantastic from start to finish. But the whole relationships between the characters, especially Ray and Nolan, I've said several times, was just superb. And I thoroughly recommend going and getting it. You can pay a small amount to obviously just watch it online, or you can buy the movie. I'm not sure if they're planning to do a DVD release. I think they are. I think that was on the Kickstarter part of it, was about you could buy a DVD as well. So I'll put the links below so you can watch it and download it and check it out. And I think if you're an Atari fan, you'll really enjoy it, definitely, because that whole thing. But I think if you're into retro gaming in general, I think sometimes with the Atari movies, people are a bit put off because they're like, oh, I'm not so interested in Atari, But I think with this, you should watch it, because one, it's about the whole creation of the industry, because there's stuff about in television in there as well, ColecoVision, them coming in. It's not just Atari, although Atari is obviously the dominant part of it. There's stuff about Bally Midway in there, the dominant arcade brand early on, and their pinball machines and stuff like that. So all of that stuff is in there as well. So if you're interested in video gaming in general, I I think you get a lot out of this movie. I mean, even the Commodore guys, because there's stuff about Chuck Peddle and the 6502 in there, so they might find that interesting. I think there's something for everyone in this. There's stuff about the arcades, the 2600, and I say the kind of whole soap opera between Nolan and Ray is just fantastic. And yeah, so I highly recommend it. I mean, if I was going to give it a rating, I think I'd give it an 8 out of 10, and I suggest you'll give it a watch. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of the movie. I hope it gives you some insight into what it's about, and I'll catch you all again for another video very soon.